Today we're going to touch upon a topic that quite possibly is the most disturbing we ever discuss on the grassy knoll. I believe it's the most heinous aspect of our society, and one that often goes undisclosed, one that often gets covered up, and one that, when exposed, many Americans have a habit of looking the other way. And I'm talking about ritual abuse. And we have with us today two guests. One of them you may have heard on the show twice before. She is Dr. Ellen Lacter, a clinical psychologist out of the University of California at San Diego. She works with victims of ritual abuse and has a website which is a trove of information regarding this issue. Now, the website's kind of long. You can go to Vyzgoth.com, Vyzygoth, and you can hit it from there. But I will tell you, just to give you one shot through this thing, it is Truth Be Known 2000.tripod.com/ Truth Be Known with a capital T, 2000/index.html. So you'll understand when I say, if you want to go to Vyzgoth.com, Vyzygoth, and while you're listening to the show right now on the net and you want to hit that, by all means do so. Okay? All right, now, what else do we have? We have with us now, for the first time, Dr. Lois Einhorn, a professor in the Communication Department of State University of New York University Center at Binghamton. Now, you may ask what has crossed the paths of Drs. Lacter and Einhorn. Well, Dr. Einhorn has written a book entitled Forgiveness and Child Abuse. Would You Forgive? This is from her own experience, and let me read you a short paragraph that will give you an idea of what's in this book. This is taken from Dr. Einhorn's website, which we'll talk about further in just a bit. Here it goes. The terrorists set in on Fridays. Would this be a weekend of lengthy ritualistic abuse? Employing techniques similar to those used in Nazi concentration camps, author Lois Einhorn's father and mother physically and sexually abused her and her sister. They forced the girls to torture each other and to torture and destroy live and stuffed animals. Dying would have been a relief. For years, Lois suffered agonizing anguish and guilt because she acquiesced, complied, and succumbed to her parents' power. Could she ever forgive? And now I want to welcome both Dr. Lacter. How you doing, Doc?
Very well.
And Dr. Lois Einhorn. Welcome to the Grassy Knoll, Lois.
Thank you.
Now, that's pretty heavy stuff, I'm sure, for you to have to hear, even though, you've written a book about it. But do you want to explain what drove you to writing the book?
As you indicated, my history of being abused, I felt agonizing anguish as an adult because I had complied with my parents' wishes. I had tortured my sister. I had tortured and killed animals. And I turned to people to really help me through my own issues of, do I forgive my parents as an adult, and how do I forgive myself? And I was very fortunate that several people from different walks of life responded. Pete Seeger, Ed Asner, Patch Adams, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Hurricane Carter. The list goes on and on of major name people who responded to my story. And in the original story, I argue why I should not forgive. And then the majority of the book consists of these 53 contributions, including one by Ellen. And what's wonderful is that the contributions, besides being interesting and often surprising, are inherently contradictory. You cannot agree with all of them. They go all over the board about whether I should or should not forgive.
Oh, you caught my eye with the one contributor, Kurt Waldheim?
Right.
Wow.
And then the book ends in a hopeful, optimistic way. I wrote an afterword about how the process of writing the book affected me, and the afterword sort of took on a life of its own, and it ends up explaining how forgiveness went from an F word for me to a reality. Much to my own surprise, I forgive my parents.
How long did it take you to write the book?
I mean, part of it's the process of grieving as well. I'd say maybe 10 years.
Was it a struggle? And did it get any easier the closer you got to the finish?
It was a struggle, of course. Grieving and forgiveness, this healing is a struggle. And yet, the book was very helpful in helping me heal.
Have you been the object of many, shall we say, emails and letters and such about people who are saying the same thing happened to me? And
yes, and it's amazing to me how many people are saying, similar things happened to them.
And it never does end, does it?
Unfortunately not, but hopefully my book will make some difference in making it clear to people that this goes on. And hopefully if we can get help for people to be heard and believed, and also help for the perpetrators. If they're not helped, the abuse is going to continue.
So there is hope, though, in the book, is there not?
I'm sorry?
I said there is hope posited in the book that this can be defeated.
Exactly. I mean, my own story is one of hope that, I say forgiveness went from being an F word to a reality, much to my own surprise. I think for me it was a byproduct of healing. Forgiveness was a byproduct of healing rather than a goal in and of itself. And I think it's almost a natural byproduct of healing. I think once you get to a certain point in the healing process, forgiveness just comes.
We heard a similar story to yours. I don't want to diminish what you went through, and so if this is phrased crudely, I apologize. But a story similar to yours by a Kathleen Sullivan. Are you familiar with her?
I'm sorry?
Kathleen Sullivan.
No.
All right. She wrote a book called Unshackled, in which she discusses what it was like at the hands of true Nazis in southeast Pennsylvania, and being used for a number of, shall we say, felonies and such. And she's just come out and she wrote that book, and it's, it was rough for her as well. Did you grow up in upstate New York?
No, I was born in Queens and lived in Long Island and lived in Virginia and a couple of different places. Went to lots of different schools. We moved a lot.
If we can go a little further, would you mind telling us? You used the word was used, the Nazi word, in the excerpt that I read from your website. Did this have anything to do, as Kathleen's did, with actually being raised by Nazis who got over to the United States and hid amongst the Pennsylvania Dutch? So is the word Nazi even more of an implication to true Nazis?
In my case, it was my parents. I grew up being Jewish, and my parents were following what was coming out in the 1950s about what was done in the concentration camps and employing the same ideas against my sister and myself.
All right. I was just curious about that because, like I had said, Sullivan talked about her parents being definitely of that persuasion. But in your situation, obviously, this was kind of a copycat thing. And you have one sibling?
Correct.
Okay, so it was you and your sister, I believe. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay. Ellen, I don't know if your situation with the people you deal with are much like Lois in the sense of this comes in the family. Do you also deal with a great many cases or percentage of them that deal with, shall we say, systematic in organizations, somewhat underground, shall we say?
Well, for most people, the family is involved, and they're the ones that are doing the abuse from often before birth through the pregnant mother, and then on, and then very often the families are part of a extended group that includes other family members and then sometimes a larger group, and then sometimes that group is kind of a subgroup of even a more broad-based larger group. But I don't believe that it's ultimately one organization and then everything kind of falls below that. I think there's a lot of subgroups.
Well, on your website, you do address a number of, I guess, the groups, and that's, I guess, in quotations that I allude to. There's witchcraft, and there's satanic cults, and and other groups. We've talked about some that I won't mention right now that I thought was quite interesting. That also was based in Pennsylvania, but. When I mention groups and associations, I mean that there is a trafficking going on in young children, is there not, in this country?
Well, I believe there is, and I don't believe it always involves children from other countries. I think a lot of parents that are involved in these kinds of ritual abuse practices, Satanism, witchcraft, make a lot of money through child pornography and through selling, or more they might call it selling, but sort of renting their children out child prostitution, and then I do believe, like in the Franklin case, that there were actual sales of children where they were permanently given to somebody, the Omaha case.
Right, and we're referring that as a pipeline also to Bohemian Grove, where I guess we can still believe that this kind of practice goes on with the elites, and you're not saying that, I am. The elites, not only in this country, but in other places as well. Debauchery at its finest, I guess. Lois, flipping back to you, since this wasn't something that was of a satanic group or anything like that, did you ever get down to the roots of why, your folks ever began this?
I mean, I can only guess, and I'm giving an unqualified diagnosis here. I think my parents had multiple personality disorder, and part of them were loving, nurturing parents. Other parts of them were obviously insane and doing this kind of abuse. The best sense I've gotten is that they had really poor self-images of themselves, saw me as an extension of them, and by hurting me, they were hurting themselves, which is a kind of contorted logic, but that's the best I've been able to make out of it.
With MPD, was this something that I guess I would say occurred organically, or was this the result of any kind of deprivation or, if you will, MK Ultra training or anything like that?
I have no clue. I mean, I assume they were abused in similar ways as a child to the ways they abused me. But again, all these are assumptions I'm making, and I'm not qualified to even say they had multiple personality disorder. That's what it appears to me.
So was there a pattern to this? I mean, by night was it one thing, and by day another, and were weekends different? I mean, how did you know who you were dealing with? Let's put it that way. Throughout the course of a day or a week or whatever.
You really did not. I mean, there were patterns in the sense that weekends were clearly different than weekdays. School days were, safe days. Weekends were not. But it didn't happen every weekend. And the other time that was very abuse-focused were long holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, when people were just focused on themselves. And, those were times where it could be 4 days of abuse nonstop.
Should I take it that summer vacations and holidays weren't really looked forward to by you and your sister?
That's one way of putting it.
Okay. All right. That I can only imagine. It was such a joyous time for most kids in America, and this was something that was actually somewhat rude by both you and she, huh?
Right. I mean, to me, school was my safety net.
Before we go any further, why don't we do this? I did not mention your website. Would you do that at this point, Lois, and tell people how they can purchase the book?
Please. Thank you. My website is my name, which is LoisEinhorn.com. Lois is Lois. Einhorn is Einhorn. If you know any German, Ein is one in German, so Einhorn means one horn, unicorn. So LoisEinhorn.com. And they can purchase the book for $3 under the retail price, which is $19.95. I'm selling it for from my website, and the website gives the information on that plus shipping. It retails for $22.95. It's hardcover, and I will send an autographed copy, and happy to do so.
Okay, and I asked you this before, but I mean, you're open to fielding emails from people who may be listening to this with, I guess, something to ask or something to share with you?
Correct. Yes. And I've had, some interesting people, including from not just the United States, but I've had Norway, the Netherlands, and Australia. So people around the globe.
So, folks, that's www.loiseinhorn.com. Again, if you want to go to my website, the 2 links are there, and you can get there in a second just by doing that. Also, Ellen, like I said, I mean, your website is loaded with resources. What would you want people to check out there? Or what kind of, what's the array of people that have been victimized that could find some kind of information or some sources there?
Well, either ritual abuse or I call it kind of government/military/espionage/political/criminal mind control. So anybody tortured from youth on, even though some people may not remember the younger part, but remember some of the adult stuff first, by organized abusers, even organized crime abusers without a spiritual agenda, or the espionage projects that I believe happen throughout the world in technological countries where kind of a mind control race parallel to an arms race to see how much control can be had over people being used as agents to do a variety of things. So organized torture survivors. I think as far as on my website page that might be the most really convincing is the one called Mind Control, Simple to Complex, because it kind of goes through starting with the kinds of mind control that most people are aware of, like brainwashing by cults that the public is fairly aware of already, where they kind of socially isolate teenagers that they might pick up at the airport and inundate them with their spiritual beliefs or whatever beliefs that they have, and break their ties with people outside, so they can't call family and friends, etc., and kind of just bombard them with their propaganda. Everybody knows about that, but then it kind of moves on down to the deliberate creation of dissociated personalities where the agenda is hidden within those personalities, both from the person and from the public, and how all of it's done. Because I think when people can see the progression of, okay, well, I know this is real and this makes sense, and okay, it's just one more step of understanding how people try to control other people's minds, and I think it helps people make sense of it. If you just hear about the horrors of what is done without understanding how it's done, most logical people will dismiss it, that it can't be true. But when you see it step by step, it makes sense.
Something that just occurred also, I guess ironically, I found an email this morning from a regular listener, and it says, and I don't think this is with any idea that you folks are going to be on, maybe it was, but she didn't reference it. It cites a link, and she said, interesting article here. And her brief email read, have you ever researched monarch mind control? Real disgusting stuff. They begin with infants and stress them to split their personalities and create alters. Who are these horrible people? And then she put TP, which means the powers that be. Are they even human? So it's a situation, that a lot of our listeners are aware of, and also of the real Manchurian Candidate side of this. Also, folks, if you do want to ask a question of either Lois or Ellen, or make a comment or whatever, you can do so via email. You can send it to Vyzygoth at hotmail.com. That's VYZYGOTH. Or you can send an instant message to Vyzygoth at MSN. Or if you want to use Yahoo, you can do so to Viz1400. Those are three ways that you can get in on this conversation, if you will. Lois, I'm sorry.
Hi.
Okay, I didn't cover it. What I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned that you lived in a number of places. Was this while you still were a child, and did you have to move for certain reasons?
It was when I was a child, and it was mostly my father had businesses that kept going bankrupt. And so we would move to another place, and he'd have a different business. My father went bankrupt 3 times, twice when I was a child, which is kind of hard to go bankrupt that many times, but he managed.
Oh. Well, was there ever a time when somehow, some way, somebody outside the family, whether it would be in school or teachers or whatever, guidance counselors, did anybody come close to unearthing this?
I had the same teacher for 1st and 2nd grade, and she was a neighbor, and I finally built up the courage and told her, and she proceeded to tell my mother, who told my father. My father was the orchestrator of the abuse, but my mother participated fully, and so all that happened was the abuse intensified, and I was forced to do more horrible things to my sister and so forth because I had told. And I was told if I ever said anything to anyone again that my father would kill my sister, myself, my mother, and ultimately himself. And it's one thing to be responsible for one's own life. It's another to also be responsible for other people's lives. So that kept me quiet for the rest of my life.
What grade was that that you mentioned it?
First and second grade. I had the same teacher for first and second grade. And it was somewhere during that time frame that I told her.
I'm only thinking, I mean, if I can ask, what was your attitude toward the teacher? Did she mean well?
I trusted the teacher and liked the teacher, and that's the reason that I turned to her for help. And I think she was trying to help, obviously. What she did was counterproductive and hurt rather than help.
So unwittingly, she did this. It wasn't like she didn't believe you and wanted your folks to know what kind of tales you were telling.
I don't know if she didn't believe it or she was just passing on to my mother as if my mother would do something about it if it was happening.
You know, it's so strange because we have on guests who talk about some of the excesses of Child Protective Services. I'm just thinking about, you know, what you went through. I mean, if this was even hinted at or just said, you know, I mean, they'd swoop down on your family in a minute, you know, now. Whereas back then, you know, how many children just had to carry on all kinds of horrors because there really was no advocate to go to. I mean, you never heard about CPS at the time you were in grammar school going through this, did you?
No, and today, though, I don't think it's a lot better. Child Protective Services is very underfunded. And, again, I know of many cases where people finally trust somebody and Child Protective Services comes to the home and either does not take the child out or takes the child out for 2 weeks and then puts the child back. And again, that just makes the abuse intensify.
How has it been?
And the child feels betrayed by their favorite teacher.
Right.
Can I add?
Oh, absolutely, Ellen, sure.
With ritual abuse, Child Protective Services does a very, very poor job because first of all, there have been a lot of organized efforts to make people not believe that this is true, that ritual abuse exists. So, and when I say organized, I mean the coverage in the media making this all look like false memories implanted by therapists or whomever, and the lawsuits against therapists and lawsuits against district attorneys and lawsuits against Child Protective Services when they did try to follow up on these kinds of cases, and bad press against law enforcement. So when a person does report these things to the authorities that help with a less complex abuse, they tend to be afraid, I believe, of really taking a look at this because of the backlash against them. And plus the kids have, I would say that the abusers, in my estimation, spend about as much time installing mind control to make sure that the kids can never remember and never tell as they do trying to groom the child for whatever they're grooming the child for, or use the child for the pornography, or execute their spiritual agenda through the child. So as much time is spent on making sure this is hidden as in whatever their true abuse agenda is. So getting past the child's terror and dissociation is something that law enforcement and child protection are not highly skilled at. Plus, very often, if the children are still residing in the general area where this abuse is going on and where the group that's involved really appear very ominous to the child, they really often can't disclose in that geographical area. But if they were moved, you know, a few hundred miles away, sometimes they're safe enough to sort of, some part of them will fight the programming and defy everything and try to get the help. But it's very, very hard to investigate. It's hard to uncover. That's what happens.
Well,
I could add one statement here. My parents frequently said that the more bizarre what they did, the safer they were.
That's right.
And there was truth to that. The more bizarre things they did, the less anyone would believe me.
Also,
let me add to that. Very often there are things that are done to make the child look crazy and to make them believe bizarre things like abusers dressing up in costumes, and the drug child is convinced that it truly is an elephant or whatever that did something to them, or staged alien abductions to make the child make the memory that is the most conscious one of an alien abduction. So, well, these aliens came and abused me, and so the abusers are putting tremendous effort and thought into cover memories that will cause any disclosures to be discounted.
Let me ask you something specifically, because you just rose this in my mind, and that is, when you have that situation, which is certainly an MO for these who abuse, and is hypnosis a chance for the child at all to be seen as more credible? Has that ever been used in a therapy?
Okay.
Or even trying to reveal what is actually going on?
Interesting question, because it touches on so many things. One, the people who have been trying to make all of these beliefs and disclosures look like false memories really came down hard on hypnosis.
Okay.
Because it does have some capacity to pull for stuff that's more deeply held unconsciously. Not that everything that's gotten under hypnosis is full truth. I'm not saying that, but they try to remove that as try to intimidate therapists out of using that as a tool. Then, well, I don't want to say then, because I don't want to claim that these authors wrote this book in response to the attempt to suppress the use of it. That might be something they wouldn't want me to say, even though I do think it was part of it. But there was a wonderful book, and I'll get you the reference in a second, written to kind of preserve hypnosis as a tool and to point out that false memories, or quote-unquote false memories, should not be attributed to hypnosis. Yes, memory is always malleable, et cetera, but hypnosis is a valuable therapy tool, and it does get to deep stuff. And it's Trauma Treatment and the Law by Corey Hammond and Hammond and some others. So they wrote this 700 or so page book to say, wait a minute, we're not throwing hypnosis away, and here's why.
What's the name of that book again?
It's it's Memory, Trauma, Treatment, and the Law.
Okay.
I need to get you the exact reference on that.
Well, for people listening too, it's just I wanted to have them hear it one more time.
Yeah, Memory, Trauma, Treatment, and the Law by Corey Hammond, Hammond. So this is a very careful academic book. And along the same lines, most survivors of organized ritual abuse and mind control have anti-hypnosis programming, so that if a therapist were to try to use hypnosis, they would fall into a deep sleep. They would be flooded with memories or anxiety, memories not in a productive way, but just overwhelming flashes of nightmarish stuff. And so the abusers actually use a lot of hypnosis within their installation of mind control, and as a method of confusing the child, controlling the child, terrifying the child, implanting terrible fears in the child, and they also try to stop therapists from being able to use hypnosis by having kids have automatic negative responses, and adult survivors have automatic negative responses to the use of it.
So the handlers, if they want to do a good job, are going to go ahead and, along with the programming, also install, if you will, an anti-hypnosis element. Yeah.
That may be done. In my case, as an adult, hypnosis was one of many tools that was used to help me uncover what happened, and was a helpful tool in that sense. One of the other points that's a little bit different direction here, one of the things that made my situation almost more difficult was that most of the time my parents were loving, nurturing parents. It would have almost been easier if they were always,
one way or the other, yeah.
Yeah, always mean, always cruel, always sadistic. But it's almost harder to accept when most of the time they're loving and nurturing, and then sometimes when all of a sudden they become doing these bizarre, horrific, very sadistic kinds of behaviors.
I have a question for you, Lois, if you'd like to field it at this time.
Sure.
All right. It's a three-parter, but it's just exactly addresses what you've been talking about. The listener wants to know, are your parents still alive?
No, they're not. My mother died in 1981 and my father in 1987. They died very young and they lived very tortured lives. My mother died at 54 and my father had just turned 60.
All right. They never were convicted of anything, is that correct?
Correct.
And
they never would have admitted. Even if they were alive, I don't know that I would have a relationship with them. I think you can have forgiveness without reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt even if they were alive that they would admit what they had done or might still be doing.
Do you mean admit that they of course just would not tell, or admit because they didn't know they did it? Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility. Certainly if they were, with multiple personality, they may not know they're doing it, or they certainly would not admit it. And even if they were alive, I doubt that I would have a relationship with them. It would not be safe for me, or certainly in my best interest. I've had other situations with people where I've seen people in just really dysfunctional families where the cost of being in the family is just too much. I think you can forgive without having reconciliation.
Well, as you were saying this, I was thinking to myself that sometimes the forgiveness is a little bit easier to do if there isn't reconciliation. I think separation sometimes is necessary, but so I can understand, how that could be.
If there's certain toxicity in the family, I think that sometimes you have to separate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
As difficult as it is, it's very difficult to have no family, not a second cousin twice removed kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been very fortunate that I've built up a family. I have someone who's adopted me as his daughter, and two people who we sort of symbolically adopted each other as sisters.
The last part of this question said, did your parents ever, the statement to see what they did, I guess you could say acknowledge, and was there ever any kind of attempt at apology?
No, they never acknowledged it.
Right.
There was never any remorse or apology without acknowledging that they were doing it. Obviously, there would be no remorse or apology.
And at this time, too, let's remind everybody you're listening to The Grassy Knoll. It's 33 minutes after the hour. With us, our doctor is Lois Einhorn and Ellen Lacter. Ellen, you've heard before. This is Lois's first appearance on the show. Their mutual topic, if you will, is ritual abuse. And while we're at it, Lois, why don't you tell us how people can order that book?
They can order my book from any bookstore, as well as from my website, which is my name, LoisEinhorn.com. Lois Einhorn is LoisEinhorn. The book is called Forgiveness and Child Abuse, Would You Forgive? And the subtitle is purposely as it is because I want listeners to think through their own, readers of the book, to think through their own situation. Would they forgive this kind of situation? It's meant to be kind of a participatory sort of book in that way. And so they have 53 responses to work off of, some of which they will, find more to their liking. And for those people who are dealing with abuse, some of the responses that really hit home to them can be like personal assistance to them in helping them go through their own journeys.
And Ellen, your website too, which has an extensive URL, people can get to that easily. I mean, I've done it myself, and that's just to go ahead in a search engine and place in Dr. Ellen Lacter, and bang, it comes up right on the top.
Okay, great.
And your website is with all the resources that are there and all the different facets of this horrible situation that you address. Can I ask you, is there any indication, either with hits on your website or emails to you or whatever, that there's one thing more than another, one aspect of this that seems to be more assimilated into our culture, that's much more prevalent than others?
What do you mean by assimilated into our...
Well, that probably is not, I should say, when you're hearing anecdotes or getting any information from folks, or if you're just looking at the website, I don't know if you keep any kind of stat package on what links people might go to more than others. But is there one element in this that seems to be more prevalent in the society, with all the different facets of ritual abuse there are, from either familial or, like we said, underground or whatever? What people are mostly victimized by? Can you say that from what you see?
I have come to believe that witchcraft, ritual abuse of witchcraft, is actually even more prevalent than satanic ritual abuse, even though there's quite a bit of that happening too. And that more people are more likely to have been victimized by those than the mind control projects run by espionage or military groups or organized criminal groups that are not involved in, obviously the ritual abusers are involved in organized crime too, but the witchcraft is a sort of very similar to Satanism in that there's a lot of worship of deities and terrifying things about fallen angels and all kinds of evil and rituals where people are hurt and abused and all of that, but the witchcraft is probably even more people in the world are affected by, and in this country. And I'm not talking about people of color. I'm talking about everybody. It's a lot of it that comes from people with lineages that go back to Europe. Lots and lots and lots.
So there was a lot of witchcraft involved in my own situation. Again, no particular deity figures of any sort, but making fun of the cross, using swastikas in a kind of really perverted way, using black robes, using candlelight, just a lot of sort of miscellaneous things connected to witchcraft.
Well, now your folks never networked with anybody, is that correct? For these purposes?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, can I ask you what your guess would be, or?
I mean, all I want to talk about is what's in the book, which is, what they did in the family, because that's what was done, frequently.
The reason I ask is because when you talk about what paraphernalia was used in apparel or whatever, that's all that they did that themselves in it. I mean, that was what they were doing. It wasn't like with anyone else around. It wasn't in any other places. It was taking place with them in your household. Is that correct?
It took place in the household, correct.
Wow.
And they were studying what other groups were doing. I'd say they were studying what was coming out from the Holocaust, what was done in concentration camps. And so many Sophie's choices. Do you want to, be hit 100 times or kill this animal? Torture and kill the animal. A lot of Sophie's choices.
Did what you went through, how did it affect your relationship with your sister? I mean, are you closer for it or whatever, or?
I've lost track. We weren't given the opportunity to be close as children. And for the last over 13 years now, I've had no contact, to the point that I don't even know where she's located. And I would not want to intrude on her confidentiality. If I Google her, I don't get anything. She can Google me and get me immediately.
Right.
So I feel like if she wants to contact me, it would be easy for her, where the opposite is not true. So I've lost contact with her completely.
I want to go back to something we were talking about before with regard to mainstream media, and I'll start off with this, Ellen. When I was a kid, one of the most disturbing movies I ever saw was grade B science fiction movie where aliens came to this town and they started to chip everybody or whatever. And this little kid knew exactly what was going on, and he runs to the police to tell them exactly what's happening, and they're reassuring the child. And as the camera pulls back for the last scene of the movie, you see that the police are chipped as well. And what that did to me as a kid is made me think, what if? What if you're one of those people who say, look, I'm not crazy, this is really happening. Now, my point in bringing that up is, with your situation, you don't find anybody, do you, in mainstream media, news, that wants to touch what's going on a larger level than just perhaps what they would consider a family thing?
You're asking me or Lois?
First you.
I'm hopeful right now that we're recovering from the mid-'90s assault, where there was so much organized pressure on the media and letter-writing campaigns to get them to talk about false allegations of abuse and false memories implanted by therapists. And I would say that throughout those organizations that were trying to make it look like all of these memories of ritual abuse, because the focus a lot was on ritual abuse and a lot of memories of general child abuse, those forces, those organizations that were doing that, were not honest academicians. They were not saying, well, we have this evidence of false memories, and they didn't have good research. In fact, some of the research, the little bit of actual research that was done, some of it is quite flawed. And the books that were written, anybody who really knows psychology could open one of those books, flip through it for 2 seconds, and put it back on the shelf, because you realize it's only showing one side and it has an agenda rather than being really truth-seeking. Well, throughout the 90s and into 2000s, the psychology community really has done its homework and has very solid answers for that movement now, where there's lots of research showing that a lot of recovered memories are based in actual abuse, based on, for instance, cases where kids came into the emergency room and there was medical documentation of their child abuse, and then they get interviewed 15 years later and they don't remember what happened, but it did happen, and lots of very solid research. So we're in a really better position now. The science has been done, and my hope is that the media is going to go the other way now. Well, let me say this. This is something I've been thinking and wanting to say. When I started working with child abuse, and somebody would come in and they would say, well, my mom got remarried and my stepfather abused me, or the school bus driver abused me. I would think, oh my God, that's horrible. A school bus driver or a stepdad. Well, a little later on, I started looking at everything the other way, where I realized, okay, people become school bus drivers to have access to children. People become married women who have young children. Obviously, not all of them, but some.
All right.
Pedophiles choose women with young children to marry to have access to their children. Same thing with understanding how so many ritual abusers end up in positions of power. It's the chicken, egg, chicken thing. It's not that the whole government is corrupt and evil, but what it is that these organized groups raise their children to be in positions that further their agenda. So they have a bunch of kids, they raise this one to be a journalist, they raise this one to be a law enforcement, hopefully FBI. They raise this other one to be a judge. This other one's going to be a lawyer. This other one's going to have a funeral home where they can get rid of the bodies. This other one's going to work for child protection. This other one's going to be a politician, hopefully, and be able to exercise power in that way. So I think that's a lot of what happens, and a lot of why so many people in powerful positions are involved in this.
You know, and you had mentioned the Franklin cover-up a while back. It's a book out there still to this day by John DeCamp, a former state senator in Nebraska. There also was a pretty decent documentary. Have you seen Conspiracy of Silence?
I have, yes.
Okay. I thought it was pretty decent, condensing, if you will, of the book as far as accuracy and such. But, you know, here's a case where you had two principals, Alicia Davis and Paul Bonacci, both having it down as to where they were and what took place, and you saw the monolith that they were up against. I mean, here you actually had the newspaper editor involved, police involved, members of the Republican Nebraska Committee anyway. And so, how can you break through that kind of structure that's pitched against you? And I guess no one has ever done time for anything that was avowed by Bonacci or Davis.
Yeah, the head of that little credit union that was the front for where they were trafficking these kids. He got some
Larry King, yeah.
Conviction.
Yeah, this is Larry King, not the guy on TV. This is the guy that was the head of that committee. Wasn't he in Nebraska?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, wait, just keep watching. There's going to be some stuff coming out on that case.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I can't say any more.
Okay.
But it'll be fun.
But now, let me move to this side of the question. And Lois, when I'm wondering, do you find that there's less resistance to your story, so to speak, because people couldn't really take it if they thought it was systemic or organizational, but in a situation like yours, they can more accept that? Is that something you do find?
I'm going to find out. I'm going to find out with this book if they can take it or not. I'm hopeful. One of my reasons for writing the book is to show the prevalence of this type of abuse and to be there for other people, survivors of this type of abuse. And I say that's where, with 53 responses, ones will resonate with particular people and hopefully serve as personal assistance to them as they go through their journeys of grieving. I think one of the things that our society does not do well is allow people to grieve intense feelings. We're almost told to not feel, take alcohol, take drugs, be a workaholic, do anything other than feel intensely. And in order to get beyond, the rage, the anger, all the feelings that go along with it, even to be able to approach forgiveness, you have to be able to feel the feelings very deeply. One of the things that I teach actually in my classes is a way that people can help other people who are feeling intensely, partly because we're such a fixed society. It's like if our friend is going through something and we don't have an answer, we tend to back away. And that's almost the worst thing we can do because it makes the person feel so alone. And I know I still have flashbacks, and nobody can take them away. I wish they could. And yet somebody just being there with me is such a gift. And I've come up with the phrase that your presence, P-R-E-S-E-N-C-E, is the greatest present, P-R-E-S-E-N-T. That for people who are trying to help other people who are going through dealing with horrific childhood abuse issues, just being there for the person makes such a difference.
How long has the book been out?
It came out officially on April 10th.
Oh, okay, so you're just going to hit the circuit right now then?
Right.
A little bit tongue-in-cheekly, but this would be, I think, a hallmark if it could happen. I guess Fooling Ellen had written that you're ready for Oprah. That would be a victory, though, wouldn't it? Be able to go on a show like that and discuss those events?
Definitely, and the publisher actually is really hopeful that that can happen, and obviously I'm hopeful that it can happen. I have no clue what the chances are.
I will say this as well, that somebody who came on critical of CPS and chronicled the battle that she and her husband had for 2 years with their child, and they were vindicated. But of course, you look at the wreckage that's been created while you are trying to exonerate yourself. Went on Montel, and I hope that happens for you. The only thing that she had said was that some of the more critical but accurate statements that she made were unfortunately excised from the broadcast. So, boy, I tell you what, it'll be great. We'll all be rooting for you to get into those venues, to get this message across, and that you can get it across in the manner that it should. But let me ask you this: at school,
I think what's gone on in the Catholic Church being made public increases the chances of. I think it makes the timeliness of the book very much, more potent.
Good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I mean, now the people have been forced somewhat to have to deal with this. It's unpleasant, but it's the truth, and what are we going to do about it? I was going to move on to something else here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead.
I just wanted to. Lois had said that hypnosis was one of the things that helped her very much, and I recently finished a wonderful book. I think the most useful book I've ever read. It is the most useful book I've ever read on working with severe trauma and dissociative conditions, and it does touch on ritual abuse a number of times in the book, but it's on hypnotherapy, and I wanted to recommend it for therapists that are working with survivors of organized abuse because it's just unbelievably good. Is that okay, Chris? Is that okay, Keith?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. It's Healing the Divided Self, Clinical and Ericksonian Hypnotherapy for Post-Traumatic and Dissociative Conditions. And the first author is Maggie, Maggie Phillips, with 2 L's. So really, really good. Highly recommend it.
Lois,
if I can add one thing here, too.
Sure.
One of the things that most helped me was a hypnotist put together an anti-programming tape that we looked at certain things. My parents played reel-to-reel tapes while I was sleeping, and we took what was put in the tapes and literally, you know, I now sleep to tapes or can sleep to tapes that have the opposite messages.
all right, let me ask you real quick, then. With what they try to do via tape-recorded all-night sessions, can you say, I mean, we hear a lot of urban legend around this, but can you say that was it efficacious? Obviously in a negative manner, but was it?
Sure, it created fear. I mean, it was meant to create fear. It did create fear. It's taken me this amount of time. I was told if I ever said anything that everyone I cared about would be killed. That has made it take a long time for me to be able to come out publicly and talk about what happened.
But did this get through your psyche, though, or your subconscious?
I'm sorry?
Did the all-night sessions, I mean, you can hear it when you're awake, obviously, and that has its own problems, but did it also work in a subconscious way during your sleep states?
I assume it did, yes.
Okay.
I mean, from what we know about, you know, subliminal kinds of programming.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fairly sophisticated for the 50s.
All right.
Can I add something here?
Sure.
There was an excellent film on this called The Sleep Room, which is about the 1950s CIA-funded project run out of Canada. Dr. Ewan Cameron, Cameron, was doing what he called experimenting with psychic driving, which was this playing of tapes over and over and over again to see how much control he could get of the person through this method.
Mm-hmm.
Right, 1950s, right, consistent with Lois's experience, state of the art at the time, and some of the victims sued, and there was a positive end to that lawsuit. So there's a little bit of proof and a little bit of vindication here.
I was going to say to you, Lois, I had a little lapse before we had a message come through, and I wanted to read this to you. It said, my heart goes out to Lois. It stinks that her childhood was as it was. I can't see anymore. So, you know, obviously that's probably resonant with a lot more people who aren't emailing, but, yeah, I thought I'd like to share that with you. I think that, you know. But now what I'm wondering about also, you are a professor of communication at SUNY Binghamton.
Right.
Now, are you teaching a class anywhere along healing lines or in this sector of your life?
Yes. In fact, my teaching has changed, I think, dramatically from the book. The contribution by Patch Adams and Dr. Bernie Siegel, Dr. Patch Adams also, both are kind of talking about teaching love through college, through, well, all aspects of schooling. And I feel like a lot of what I'm teaching in college now is teaching peace and teaching love. I've designed some courses that I've created from scratch. One's on communication ethics and social action, using communication to affect constructive social change, and teaching students how to stand up for themselves, how to maintain the truth even when it's an unpopular view. Another course I teach is on compassionate nonviolent communication, and we use a model that's out there by Marshall Rosenberg that's a fairly common use in a lot of areas now, but we also go beyond it in different directions and deal with self-talk and the need to be compassionate toward ourselves and how that can translate into being compassionate toward others and then to society at large. So yes, it's affected very much what I teach as well as how I teach.
Well, it sounds like the administration is supportive of you, and that's great if I got that right. Because I just came out of working for a university for 4 years, and I'm not as confident anymore about what I see in academic settings. So this sounds like a positive development if in fact that is the case. And
they've allowed me to teach courses, to design
right.
courses. And that's been a wonderful thing. We have a thing just called Studies in Rhetoric, and you just pick a letter at the end of it. Rhetoric 450, A, B, C, D. And you can teach whatever you want under it.
Okay.
That was a wonderful. I went there to college, Keith. That school is open. You know, it's always been progressive. It's wonderful.
At SUNY Binghamton?
Yes.
Okay, great. I should have gone there.
It was great. You missed a good time.
Well, no, don't say that. Wherever I went, it would break out. Well, listen, we're running out of time. So, Lois, one more time, please tell us about the website and how they can get the book.
The website is my name, LoisEinhorn.com. Lois is Lois. Einhorn is EINHORN. So this is one word, LoisEinhorn.com. It's also available at any bookstore. The name of the book is Forgiveness in Child Abuse. Would you forgive?
All right, and parting comments, Ellen, about your website and the work you do?
Oh, do I want to add anything?
Yep. We got about a minute or two left.
They might want to check out the seminar in Salt Lake coming up at the end of July by Steve Ogilvy, who really understands mind control and provides 300 pages and 3 days of very, very advanced information.
How can they find out about...
It would actually help me as well.
There you go. How can they find out exactly with the wheres and whens and all the other information, the costs and such?
Like I said, all they have to do is put my last name, Lacter, Lacter, and the word ritual on Google. It pops up first. Hop on my website, and there's a page there. It's called Mind Control Programming Seminar, July 28th through 30th in Salt Lake. Okay.
I want to tell you, Lois, that... if you don't mind, I'm not like a lot of other people competitively with this radio business. If you wouldn't mind, there are some people, I think, whose audiences would not listen to the show necessarily, but obviously would get it. And if you don't mind, I'd like to pass along your information and have them have you on. Would that be okay with you?
That would be wonderful.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you came on as early as you have. God bless you with the book. I hope maybe in a couple of months or so you can come on and we can more or less use it as an assessment as to how things are going. Would that be all right with you?
That'd be wonderful also.
All right, Lois, thanks so very much. And Ellen Lacter, once again, thanks for coming on the Grassy Knoll and for having Lois come this way. I appreciate that, and, this ain't over yet.
Yes.
Okay. All right, folks, we'll see you again. God bless you, and thank you for coming on.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.